Hello and welcome to this candidates forum for the Massachusetts 11th Middlesex District State Representative. The general election will be held on Tuesday, November 5th. I'm Jen Adams, the news director of Newton News at NewTV, and I will serve as the moderator today. This forum is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Newton and is co-produced with NewTV. This forum is being recorded on Thursday, September 26, 2024. The 11th Middlesex District in Massachusetts is one of 160 legislative districts included in the lower house of the Massachusetts General Court. The 11th Middlesex District represents approximately 44,000 people living in the Newton area. In Ward 1, Precincts 2 and 3. In Ward 2, all 4 precincts. Ward 3, Precincts 1, 2, and 3. In Ward 4, all 4 precincts. And in Ward 7, Precincts 2, 3, and 4. The League is responsible for communicating with candidates and organizing the format, questions, and moderator. NewTV's primary role is facilitating production and dissemination of the forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, multi-issue organization that encourages informed, active participation of citizens in government. The League does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. No League members involved in this forum, including the planners, moderator, and timekeeper, are endorsing either of these candidates for this office. Members of the League of Women Voters of Newton may become candidates for public office. While the League encourages their members to become politically active, there are specific procedures in place to ensure the integrity of their forums and fulfill their commitment to being a nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Please be assured that all efforts are made to create a wall between all of the candidates and the League forum planning. This barrier specifically includes no access to forum questions. If you have a concern about this, please do not hesitate to contact the League at info@lwvnewton.org. There are 2 candidates running for this seat, Ms. Mah Sangiolo, representing the Democratic Party, and Mr. Vladislav Yanovsky, representing the Republican Party. There are no candidates running for this office in the Libertarian or other parties. Let me remind the audience that enrolled voters in the 11th Middlesex District may vote for only one of these 2 candidates. We will now meet the candidates in alphabetical order. Mah Sangiolo is a Supervising Consumer Specialist, housing team lead with the Consumer Advocacy and Response Division of the Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau at the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. She has lived here for 29 years and is a former Newton City Councilor. Vladislav Yanovsky is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, runs a nonprofit career school for adults, training aspiring healthcare professionals for the workforce. He is a clinical educator by training and holds multiple licenses in the medical field. He is also an inventor with successful patents and has lived in Newton for 29 years and in the 11th Middlesex District for 14 years. The candidates have already received the format and ground rules for this forum earlier today. Here is an overview. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to introduce themselves in their opening statement. We'll then move on to a series of questions directed at both candidates, which will alternate between them starting in alphabetical order. Response time will be 90 seconds. There will be a timer running in order to inform the candidates how much time remains as each candidate speaks. Stop will be displayed when the time is up, and candidates are expected to stop speaking when completing their sentence. As a moderator, I will decide if there is a need for rebuttal. Questions were collected in advance from the public via email and selected by the League of Women Voters. All questions will be addressed to both candidates and will apply to issues or qualifications for their particular office. We will ask as many questions as time allows, sometimes combining similar questions, striving to cover a variety of topics. We will finish with a 60-second closing statement from both candidates in reverse alphabetical order. We will now begin with the 90-second opening statement from each candidate. Amy, you're first.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having me. My name is Mah Sangiolo, and I'm running to be the next state rep for the 11th Middlesex District. I'm a former Newton City Councilor, and I currently work at the Attorney General's Office in Housing. This is a critical time as we face many challenges, whether it's a housing crisis, climate crisis, housing shortage, aging infrastructure, underfunding of our school systems, or attacks on our rights. I believe that I have the skills and leadership experience to tackle these challenges on day one. First, I have deep experience in getting things done through the legislative process. As you mentioned earlier, I served on the City Council for 20 years. I led on issues like preserving open space, protecting our trees, demanding more affordable housing units, and getting more affordable housing units in developments. I also have a proven track record of being extremely responsive and accessible and delivering excellent constituent service. I also do that in my day job at the Attorney General's office as I help individuals and families prevent evictions and foreclosures. And I also have a deep commitment to good government, accountability, and transparency. As many of you know, I started a newsletter back in 2015 so that I can inform folks of what was happening with their government, and I continue to do that by co-founding Fig City News. Look, folks, I was an effective representative for you at City Hall, and I pledge to be an effective representative for you at the State House. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, your 90-second opening statement, please.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. I'm so glad to be here at these magnificent studios of NewTV. Every time I come here, it's an amazing experience. So thank you very much for you and for League of Women Voters. I am Vlad Yanovsky, and I am the common sense, safety, and fiscal responsibility candidate for the 11th Middlesex District. As a veteran, as a businessman, as a clinical professional, I bring a tremendous amount of experience that is so desperately needed on Beacon Hill today. I'd like to bring in the business approach to the Beacon Hill, to introduce a sense of fiscal responsibility and openness to the public. That will be my goal in my very first term, and hopefully not too many terms thereafter, as I don't intend to stay in that position too long. I believe in term limits. I believe in accountability for our politicians, and I don't want it to be a career for anyone. It's public service. This is what I'm here for. So, introducing sense of frugality, meaning that people on Beacon Hill should know that they're dealing with people's money and treat it as their own. So people write common sense laws that don't overburden the public, that promotes new business development and positive things, the reduction of taxes, which will ultimately lead in more money coming into the state coffers and city coffers. I'm going to be a good leader. I was trained to lead men and women into battle, and I'm going to do the same thing on Beacon Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad. The first question will be directed to you, Vlad, and you have 90 seconds to respond. So here we go. The first question to you. The public overwhelmingly supports improving transparency in our state legislature. Would you vote to make House Legislative Committee votes public? And what else would you do to improve transparency in state government?
Excellent question. The answer, of course, is unequivocally no. And yes, I mean, oh gosh. I will vote first and foremost, or work towards ending the informal sessions currently running on Beacon Hill, making everything as transparent as possible. I'm not exactly sure what all the rules are as far as keeping things under wraps over there, but this is the people's house on Beacon Hill, and I'm going to do my very best to make everything as transparent as possible. I don't think I have anything else to add here, but I will be there and I will be here for you. You will come to me directly, even having house hours and at my house right here in the district.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy, the question to you, would you like me to repeat it?
No, I think I'm fine. So I do believe in transparency and accountability. As I said in my opening statement, I have experience and a record of providing folks with the information that they need so that they understand what their government is doing and how their government is discussing, what their government is discussing and what they're voting on and how they're voting. So, and to your point and your question on whether I would vote to make committee votes public, yes, I would. And I would support that effort. In terms of other issues, like Vlad, I'm not familiar with all the rules and regulations on how folks operate. I do understand that a lot of the information and a lot of the committee reports are online. So any way that I can make them more accessible, I will continue to do that, just as I did with my own newsletter. So I want to make sure that people have trust in government. And I believe to have trust in government, you need to see how government works, how people are voting, and how the sausage is made. I think that's important.
Thank you, Amy. We will move on to question number 2, and Amy, this starts with you. Our local leaders have not effectively modeled the skills of civil discussion, leaving some residents feeling devalued and silenced on various issues. What would you do as a state representative to ensure that all life experiences are understood and their humanity valued?
So I think that's a great question. It's a difficult question to figure out how to navigate, how to make people feel safe. One of the things I did a few years ago, I held some forums that were informal. They were online forums so that we could have discussions on development, on housing, on rats. We wanted to make sure that people felt comfortable and felt like no one was going to attack them for having these views. And I think the more, whether they're called town halls or open sessions or other forums, I think that's the way to get people to feel safe in their own space, whether they want to participate in person or at home online. Also to make them feel like laying out ground rules, right, to make sure that people do not attack anyone for anyone's views. And I think those are probably the best ways to go about creating that safe space where people can have conversations. People differ on a whole bunch of different issues, but the only way to make progress is for each other to hear each other's views and to work towards whatever that common ground is.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, the question to you. Would you like me to repeat it?
No. Wonderful question. And in the course of this campaign, I have had several interactions, very positive interactions with Amy, and I've enjoyed them very much. And even though we have vastly divergent political views, I think we have been very friendly and cordial with one another. And I would encourage that with just about everybody else. People must commit to performing random acts of kindness. I know it sounds kind of strange, but you know what? Kindness is key, and appreciating others' beliefs and systems, as long as they don't infringe on your own personal safety and freedom, are key. The First Amendment to the Constitution is key. We must protect it at all costs. Empowering each other to be good to one another. I think that's the goal. I'm not sure how we can do this through legislation. I doubt that we can, but on a personal level, I, for one, am here to make that commitment. You know, random acts of kindness, charity, giving, kindness. I think it's going to go a long way.
Thank you, Vlad. All right, we're moving on to question number 3, and Vlad, we'll start with you. A portion of the new 4% millionaires tax, known as the Fair Share Amendment, on the state's wealthiest residents is used to provide all public school students with free weekday meals. It is also planned to be used to invest in K-12 schools, making early education and care excellent and accessible, and supporting higher education for students. However, this revenue source can fluctuate. What legislation would you enact to stabilize revenue, and what benefits would you prioritize?
Thank you very much. I support school choice, and I support limited taxation. As I mentioned before, it is a proven fact that when you tax people less, especially the wealthy, more money flows into the city and state coffers. It happened every time it has been tried. So it's a fact. It's an economic fact that when you tax people less, especially those people who are able to invest into the infrastructure by starting up new companies, and even though many new businesses fail, the right number of businesses stay afloat, and the money through taxation of businesses comes in very freely. Taxing the rich never worked, because the rich simply pack their bags and they leave, and then we have nothing. So I would not support any kind of a tax on anyone, especially the wealthy or the poor, through any kind of regressive taxation that we can come up with. So the poor suffer greatly when we tax the wealthy, because the wealthy simply hide their money elsewhere because they know how. And I can't fault them. They came to that money through hard work, sweat, and tears, and everything else that a private business owner goes through. So my answer is no. I would not support any of that, except lowering taxes for everyone except across the board, making sure that we have more money coming in through our expanded economy.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy, the question to you. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yeah, could you please?
Certainly.
Thanks.
A portion of the new 4% millionaires tax, known as the Fair Share Amendment, on the state's wealthiest residents is used to provide all public school students with free weekday meals. It is also planned to be used to invest in K-12 schools, making early education and care excellent and accessible, and supporting higher education for students. However, this revenue source can fluctuate. What legislation would you enact to stabilize revenue, and what benefits would you prioritize?
So unlike Vlad, I think the millionaire's tax has been a great success story for us in terms of all the things that you mentioned, whether it's for funding public school lunch meals or breakfast meals, the K through 12 schools, and certainly the higher ed piece. I know that much of the money went to child care grants and will continue to go through to child care grants, and another portion will go through to transportation to fund public transportation needs. So in terms of legislation, I guess one thing that I could think of is that we make sure that whatever amount that we're funding, that we make sure that that amount is stabilized and will continue so that we don't have this fluctuating revenue change from year to year. We want to make sure that the school meals will be funded. We want to make sure that the grants to child care providers will be funded. We want to make sure that our K through 12 schools have all the resources that they need and are depending on by using this source of money.
May I say something?
You have 30 seconds.
I do. I just want to remind everyone, as a little public service announcement here in Newton, that just about everyone who owns a home in Newton is a millionaire in the eyes of the Massachusetts Department of Massachusetts Revenue. Sorry, I forgot their name. So everyone can be considered a millionaire. There's no way to get around that.
All right, we will move on to question number 4. And Amy, we'll start with you. Gas leaks are polluting our air, killing our trees, and are a health hazard and potential fire hazard. How would you solve this problem?
We have to get off gas. I think that's the fastest way to solve the problem. Ratepayers are spending millions of dollars, we're spending millions of ratepayer dollars redoing our infrastructure, our gas infrastructure, which we know will become obsolete in a few years, right? So instead of replacing replacing the infrastructure, we should be repairing these gas leaks that we know that exist, and we have to do it safely. So, and what we should be spending those ratepayer dollars on is laying infrastructure for clean energy and getting off of fossil fuels as quickly and expediently as possible. So I think that's the best way. I mean, look. Public transit makes up 40%, I believe, of our CO2 emissions. So we have to make sure that we transition all of our public transit to clean energy and electrify our system. We know that I think 30% of our CO2 emissions are coming from our development and our buildings. So we need to make sure that, have a statewide BERDO, which is a building emissions measuring tool, so that folks know how much carbon emissions are coming out of our existing buildings, and making targets so that we can quickly transition off of fossil fuels. I think that's important. And also, for new development, we have to make sure that we don't do gas hookups. We have to go and electrify or find other clean sources of energy.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, the question to you. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Electricity is made by burning something and boiling water. For that, we have coal, oil, natural gas, and nuclear. That's how electricity is made. We don't collect it from any place else. We have to burn fossil fuels. So whether we burn them here or someplace else makes no difference, except the efficiency factor. You see, it doesn't cost anything to send gas to the house, but it does cost something to transmit electricity across the wires. There's a tremendous inefficiency. We lose about 80% of power from coal or oil, and coal is the most efficient of the old fossil fuels. It exceeds value by 30% of oil or natural gas. So to get off fossil fuels would be folly. It would be absolutely terrible. So-called renewable resources require fossil fuels because our grid cannot support the changes and fluctuations of renewable power sources like solar or wind. Solar or wind plants kill animals. They are absolutely not renewable resources. And what do we do when solar panels expire? Why, we send them to Africa, where poor and unfortunate people over there with bare hands, dismantle them at the great risk and peril to their lives. It's a fantasy. We can't do that. We need oil for our roads, for all sorts of things, including medicine and everything else. It's too early. It's too early.
Thank you. Yes, Amy, you have 30 seconds.
I just want to say, look, we have a climate crisis here, and we have to do all we can to get off of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is the leading source of the reason why our planet is warming up so quickly. So I want to do everything that we can to make sure that we transition off of fossil fuels and get to clean energy. That includes moving towards solar and wind, and looking at our permitting and siting and making sure that we don't impose on environmental justice communities. It also includes making sure that we are intentional about how we are going to work with our communities to make that transition.
Okay, we'll move on to question number 5, and Vlad, this one's for you. After experiencing the unfortunate state of the Stewart-owned hospitals, what oversight would you plan to legislate for private equity firms, and should they be allowed to own entities such as hospitals and prisons on a for-profit basis?
Wow. Well, I think we need to sort of separate a little bit the private prisons with privately owned hospitals. I've spent most of my adult life working in hospitals, for hospitals, around hospitals, so I understand how it goes. We used to have an absolutely amazing system of community hospitals. Almost in every neighborhood we had a community hospital with community involvement. Right now, hospitals are beholden to big insurance, big pharma, and we have lost control of what we do in the healthcare sector. Whether it's a giant equity firm that's running the show or some other enterprise, most of it is still big government controlling the hospital at the end of the day. It's the reimbursement by government agencies such as Medicare and Medicaid that make it very difficult for a hospital or a healthcare facility to actually operate within the confines of good conscience. As a person who holds multiple licenses in healthcare, I can tell you that firsthand. And I had unfortunately seen the demise of our community hospitals over the last 40 years, which I think is a tragedy. I think a return to community-based hospitals with community involvement. We used to have candy stripers. We used to have the retired people working, volunteering in the hospitals, making patients' lives wonderful. Today, stop by the hospital, as I'm sure you have. It is a disaster and a disgrace. As far as private prisons are concerned, no.
Thank you very much. Amy, the question to you, would you like me to repeat it? After experiencing the unfortunate state of the Stewart-owned hospitals, what oversight would you plan to legislate for private equity firms, and should they be allowed to own entities such as hospitals and prisons on a for-profit basis?
So in terms of the first part of the question about oversight, I think we definitely do need oversight. We need to get a handle of how many of our hospitals are being funded or owned by private equity firms. I would support any legislation that would ban private equity firms from owning any of our medical providers, our hospitals that provide the much needed health care that we need in the system. I too support community hospitals, and I'm very sad to see their demise, but I don't think private equity firms have any business in the medical profession. Also, I want to add that I find that in my work in housing, private equity firms are buying up properties and pushing out and raising rents and pushing out tenants and creating not a good situation for folks who need much needed housing. In terms of buying up prisons, I think the same holds true. I think we have to make sure that we have oversight and we have legislation to prohibit that.
Thank you, Amy.
May I add one thing?
You have 30 seconds left.
I'm going to need a lot less than that. I'd like to keep the government out of the healthcare altogether. I cannot stand government legislating any kind of healthcare, whether it's hospitals or abortions. So I'd like to keep the government out of any aspect of healthcare.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to question 6, and Amy, we'll start with you. Do you support the MBTA multifamily zoning requirement that will enable more smart growth development? And in order to build more housing at transportation nodes, we must have effective and efficient public transportation. What improvements to public transportation would you suggest to occur in the Middlesex District across the state? Okay,
so yes, I supported the MBTA Communities Act. Not so sure about the implementation and the timelines that we were under. The city actually went through a very long process trying to get that passed. It was sort of divisive, but we got through it and we complied. So I'm grateful that we were able to comply. Now it's up to the state to hold up its bargain to make sure that we provide the much needed public transit in order to make this transit-oriented development actually transit-oriented. So I would definitely want to make sure that we invest in our public transit system. That means we actually carry on the hard work and the good work that State Representative Kay Kahn has been working on to get our rail stations, commuter rail stations, accessible. We need to have that done immediately. Look, Newton held up its bargain. It even added Auburndale to the MBTA Communities Act. So we want to make sure that the state holds up its bargain and make sure that the Newtonville station, which was promised to us, gets funded so that we can get these stations, and none of our stations here in Newton on the commuter rail line are accessible. We have to get all of them accessible. And once we get them accessible, we'll have more people on public transit and will help the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, the question to you. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, thank you.
Okay.
So every election cycle, we have this debate on the MBTA. And every time we keep talking about funding, refunding, streamlining this, and every year there's that issue that comes up, every election cycle. That means there must be some inherent problem with the MBTA and how it's run. The problem is that knowing how the government works, having been part of the government, and I mean in the military and in the VA, I can tell you that the government doesn't really work within the private sector. It's a galling disaster. So government needs to be limited in its scope. It certainly has no business providing any kind of transportation because it doesn't know how. They waste taxpayers' money on the MBTA. It is a disgrace and a disaster. The sooner we get off or help the MBTA to admit that they are a failure, like in every recovery program, these people, unfortunately, the structure of the MBTA is basically a drug user. So we have to have an intervention, have a de-governmentalization of the transit, and hopefully something will work. We have private sector has provided things like Uber. I am sure that with a little bit of help and incentive, the private sector can help deal with the MBTA. I'm sorry, but the MBTA is a failure.
Thank you. Yes?
I
Amy,
just
you have
want to
30
say,
seconds.
as someone who commutes into Boston, I used to take the commuter rail a lot back when I worked downtown at the near South Station. Now I take the T when I can and when it's running to go to Government Center. I think it's a great resource for people to have, and I believe that more people would ride the commuter rail if they didn't have to traverse those very long stairs. It's not accessible for anyone, for people with disabilities, for elderly, for people with young children who have to navigate those stairs with strollers. So that's the #1 priority, to make those stations accessible.
All right, we will move on to question number 7. Vlad, we'll start with you. Similar needs and economic feasibility point to regionalization as an approach to legislation. Do you agree with this approach, and where would you start, and what would you include, and why?
Well, this is why Amy and I are here. We are running as state representatives. This is as regionalization as one can imagine if we're talking about this particular region, and if I understand the question correctly. So I think local involvement is key, and the more people interact with us, whether we get elected or not, is key to assuring success in government. I hope I understood the question correctly, but this is basically my answer. Staying focused, people being involved, making sure that their government works and that they stay in touch, and that we as elected officials, if I ever get to that position, stay focused on my constituents.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy?
Could you repeat that?
Certainly. Similar needs and economic feasibility point to regionalization as an approach to legislation. Do you agree with this approach, and where would you start, and what would you include, and why?
So I am a big fan of regionalization. I'm not sure how it works with legislation, but certainly we need to look at planning, transportation, and economic development. I think those are the big three that where if we were to regionalize and work with our neighboring communities, we can actually get things and more things accomplished. Whether that's planning for housing, that's one thing that we can do if we all shared in how many units of housing we need, what type of units, and making sure that that we're all connected in terms of folks who need assistance. I think that's great, housing assistance. I think in terms of public transportation and transportation infrastructure, like our roads. I was just on a Newton Corner Planning Committee meeting on yesterday, and we were talking about how the roadway changes could impact drivers, and these drivers are not just Newton residents, but they're commuters from all over the state who use our roads and go through Newton Corner and the Circle of Death. So I think that's important to make sure that we are all in concert working together. And definitely with economic development, I think the same thing can be true. We have the Charles River Chamber, which is a great example of how regionalization, working together with our neighboring communities, can help make a more vibrant area for us. I just want to circle back again on that transportation piece, because I forgot to mention that the I-90 project is another big issue where we need to work together as communities that go through and live near the I-90 Alston-Brighton roadway.
Thank you, Amy.
Quick clarification.
You have 30 seconds, Vlad.
Thank you so much. If regionalization means central planning, then I oppose it completely and totally. It doesn't work. I lived in a country that was centrally planned. It had the vastest resources and huge numbers of people that worked, and everybody was hungry and destitute. And the public transportation was just awful too. So just a clarification.
Okay, well, moving on to question number 8, and Amy, we'll start with you. What actions must the state take to address racial disparities in housing opportunities?
That's a very tough question in terms of how we're going to do it. Most of the folks that I work with at the Attorney General's office are people who are the most vulnerable populations, and trying to make sure that our fair housing laws are enforced, making sure that there's no racial discrimination to folks who are either applying for rental units or applying for mortgages is absolutely crucial. So how do we do that? Through legislation, maybe tightening up our fair housing laws, possibly putting in more protections in terms of enforcement, making sure that our tenant protections are in place in terms of any kind of, whether it's racial discrimination or discrimination based on income or discrimination based on disability. I think those are the three biggest challenges that we see facing tenants and prospective homeowners who are trying to access housing opportunities. So again, I think just strengthening our fair housing laws is probably the best way to go.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, the question to you.
Would you mind repeating it, please?
Not at all. What actions must the state take to address racial disparities in housing opportunities?
Thank you. I'm not so sure that state can do any more than they have already done. We have so many laws in the books that guarantee fair housing and so on and so forth, and we have so much enforcement in place that I'm not exactly sure that this concept of racial disparity is actually something that truly exists on an institutional level. On a personal level, I can't speak for people. I'm sure there are bad people everywhere. There are people who do discriminate. The discrimination is a fact of life, and I don't think we can legislate that away, unfortunately, or fortunately, because everyone is free to do whatever it is that they please, as long as it doesn't interfere with another person's quality of life. I am not so sure that legislation is the way to go. We do have lots of laws in the books, maybe even too many, but I think there is plenty of opportunity for people to be and to get into an apartment or a house. I don't think there are any issues for people to buy a house as long as they qualify financially. If they meet the mortgage requirements, they can do that. If a person meets rental agreement requirements, having specific income or specific credit score, payment history, that's not discrimination in the classic sense of the word. It's a discretion of the landlord. I'd have to end it here.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple more things. So we have to make sure that people of all races have access to housing opportunities. We have to create more mixed, different variety of housing for people of all income levels. But I'm big on being intentional about creating truly affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. I think one aspect that I know our city did was looking at our local preference, changing how much of the local preference goes to people who work here versus opening it up. I think that needs to be looked at because I think it might have not the impact that we wanted. Thank you.
Thank you. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that people understand that government can't create anything. Government can only take. Government doesn't create, it takes away. Only take, take, take. And the government takes at the point of the gun because they use the law. And that's the only way people part with their hard-earned money, because they know a punishment is coming. Government can't do anything. Only private enterprise can save us, with oversight.
Thank you, Vlad. We will start with you for question number 9. What will you do to help improve access to mental health and substance use services, especially for children and adolescents?
Amazing. Thank you so much. I love the question. Yeah, we have a huge mental health crisis. Ever since our mental health facilities had been closed in the 80s, we have seen a tremendous resurgence of homelessness, which are primarily mentally ill people who really don't have a place to go. And the same is true for drugs. It is a major, major problem. I think as a people of conscience, we must reinvigorate the programs for mental health facilities for people who desperately need them. With housing, they had multiple levels of housing. Now they have nothing. They're forced to be on the streets. And even though they have all the opportunities to be in a shelter or to have their own home and to have money for sustenance, they choose not to do that because they mentally are not capable of doing so. We have a mental health crisis. That we do have a crisis. We may not have a existential crisis in the climate, but we do have an existential crisis for the mentally ill people who are living in the streets, who are suffering in heat and cold and hunger, even though they don't have to. So I think the state needs to revive its mental health programs that it once used to have, go back to where we used to be. And yes, as a people, as a community, we have to find a way to fund it. Yes.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy, the question to you. Would you like me to repeat it? Sure. What will you do to help improve access to mental health and substance use services, especially for children and adolescents?
Okay, so that's a great question. In terms of access to mental health and substance use services, we definitely need more. So many people with issues are going and spending time in emergency rooms, and that's not the appropriate place for people to go. I believe that we need to not only create housing, but we also need to have more community behavioral health centers. I support that. So that is an opportunity for people to just access whenever they need it. I think we need more resources in our schools. One thing that we definitely do not pay enough attention to is the youth behavior surveys that I believe most school systems use to track their children and see what's going on with the students. So I think it definitely points to the need for more resources, mental health resources, more counselors, more social workers in our schools. I think that's another way to access it. We have to end stigmatizing mental health and substance use. No one should be stigmatized because of it. It's a disease that needs to be treated, and treatment should be made available and accessible to all.
Thank you, Amy. All right, we'll start with you for question number 10. What legislation would you initiate or support that will promote planning for natural and unnatural disasters and make Massachusetts less dependent on a federal response?
So, I'm sorry. So natural and unnatural disasters, what legislation would I support?
Would you initiate or support that will promote planning for natural and unnatural disasters and make Massachusetts less dependent on a federal response?
So I think that all goes back to planning, and we need to make sure that we work together as a community. Not just when we're building a development, we have to make sure that the infrastructure is in place in order to take whatever the runoff is, the infrastructure to absorb the water runoff from the buildings. We have to make sure that we save our trees and preserve our trees and build around it, and because the natural environment can help with our adapting to all the disasters that we're seeing. We know that we have more flooding, more severe flooding. We have more severe droughts and severe storms and occurrences that we can definitely plan for. We need stormwater infrastructure in place. Again, preserving our trees because trees absorb water. We have to make sure that when we are building that all the infrastructure is in place so that it doesn't further exacerbate some of the issues that we're seeing through these natural occurrences.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, the question to you.
Thank you so much. Well, as a former first responder and a soldier, this topic is very near and dear to me. I would support community engagement with our local resources first and foremost. What are our resources? They're the fire, police, and EMS. So community engagement, running classes with these organizations that help prepare for personal preparedness on a personal level. Of course, improving our infrastructure with police and fire so they have the tools that are needed to help the community in need. Working with the National Guard to make sure that their response is also managed and is implemented appropriately. All these things are in place. We do have systems in place. We've spent, at this point in time, probably billions of dollars on the infrastructure, but it's still a big problem. We have a big problem with our electrical grid in Massachusetts. It's aged. It cannot tolerate what the natural or unnatural disasters may bring. We have to invest a lot of money into that to make sure that it functions under adverse weather conditions. Right now, even with a light rain, you can expect a power outage. And you know what happens in the wintertime around here. Yeah, it's a problem. But the interaction with our already existing infrastructure by regular people, by civilians, if you will help strengthen our personal response and responsibility to these disasters.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy, yes, you have 30 seconds.
So now that I've had some time to think, I wanted to add a couple more things. We should make sure that we're careful about where we build. Don't build in flood zones. I have personal experience in that because I worked on Senator Kerry's flood insurance reform bill where people were building along coastal flood zones and insurance companies were just continuing to insure them and then making it a big burden on taxpayers. We also have to start planning for 100-year storms because they're no longer 100-year storms. We're seeing them more frequently.
Thank you, Amy. All right, we'll move on to question number 11, and Vlad, we'll start with you. The most housing insecure are those whose incomes are 50% or less of the AMI. We know that private development through things like inclusionary zoning provides housing, but typically not for the most insecure. What have you done and will continue to do to help solve this problem?
Well, so making more money is the key. So making sure that people who are the most vulnerable are no longer that. Making sure that people receive access to career education that they need to earn more money. So you earn more money, you're no longer insecure. Massachusetts has a great set of opportunities for people to be. Not everybody needs to live in Newton, not everybody needs to live around Boston. You can move further out and things are much more affordable there too. You have to be able to live within the means and sometimes it requires moving. So I don't believe that we as a government can actually subsidize somebody else's lifestyle, and we shouldn't do that because that means that we're taking money away from somebody else. Who's to say that they don't need it? Okay, I do not support taking money out of one pocket and putting it in the other. I support empowering people to earn more for themselves and becoming more self-sufficient. I've done a great amount of work on that over the last 20 years. I've personally trained tens of thousands of people to do just that. They're earning more money. They're able to afford their own homes. It may not be in Boston. It can be in Randolph or Canton and other wonderful cities and towns that time has forgotten. You know, beautiful city of Lowell is just beautiful. Not everybody needs to live here. Let's go over there too. Let's redevelop these areas where they're less expensive, make them the Newtons.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy, the question to you, would you like me to repeat it? The most housing insecure are those whose incomes are 50% or less of AMI. We know that private development through things like inclusionary zoning provides housing, but typically not for the most insecure. What have you done and will continue to do to help solve this problem?
So in terms of what I've done to address this issue, I've supported Newton's inclusionary zoning ordinance. I am definitely an advocate to increase their inclusionary zoning ordinance. I think it currently is at 17%. I think it should go up to 20%. If we can do that statewide, even better. I think if we are going to take a look at Chapter 40B, which is another way to increase 40B, the development of affordable housing, we should increase the percentage to 30%. Also, I believe that just from my work at the Attorney General's office, that we need more wraparound services. Folks who are at this level or below really need services. It's not just rental assistance. They need a way out of getting out of this cycle of poverty. They need to understand, they need financial training. They need definitely child care services. They need health care services. There are a lot of services and support that these folks need in order to lift them up and out of and break that cycle of poverty. So in terms of other things that I've done, I think it's just really referring folks to these wraparound service organizations that are around the state, but they do need more funding. They need more support, and we need to get more people to them so that we can help folks, again, get out of the cycle. And in terms of just relying on market, I don't believe that we can rely on the market to provide this much needed housing and deeply affordable housing. So whatever the government can do to fund and subsidize more deeply affordable housing, we need to do that.
Thank you, Amy. All right, we'll move on to question number 12, and we'll start with you, Amy, on this one. In February of 2023, the Massachusetts legislature introduced the End of Life Options Act. If passed, this bill would allow Massachusetts residents to have access to medical aid in dying. Death with dignity laws have been proven effective at improving health care quality at the end of life. Do you support the passage of this bill? Why or why not?
So yes, I support the passage of the bill. Just having gone through the deaths of my parents, I definitely understand how difficult it is to watch your loved one suffer. My father went through and died at his home. He had liver cancer, and there was nothing that we could do because it wasn't legal to help him just end his suffering. In terms of my mother, she died from COVID, but before she caught COVID, she was suffering from dementia, and you could tell the toll that it took on her. And her feeling of helplessness. I understand so many families are going through this. I definitely, again, support it.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, the question to you.
Yes. Well, difficult question, especially since I just lost my father, and just a couple of years ago, right before COVID, I lost my mother. So all of this is very fresh. I support life at every stage. There is no dignity in death. All death is indignant. That's why supporting life is equally far more important for people around those who are suffering and at near death or whatever the case may be. Everyone needs to remember their humanity at this tragic time and be at their very best. No, I don't think assisted suicide is the way to go. We already do that in hospitals everywhere. We call it comfort measures. And basically that is physician-assisted suicide. I know a lot of people don't want to look at it that way, but those of us who have dealt with cancer or heart failure, whatever the case may be, we have all been presented these options as family members. Sometimes it gets a little bit in the way of the family and the person who is actually suffering, who wants to live. That kind of mentality stands in the way of actually fighting for life. So, no. I don't support that act, and I don't want government to legislate any phase of human life, whether it's death or before its inception.
Thank you. All right, so we will move on to question number 13, and Vlad, we'll start with you. Should broadband be considered a utility available to all, no matter where people are located?
No. It's a paid service. If you want to use it, use it. And I personally think it's a little bit more invasive right now, the broadband. I think people need to sort of have a little bit of freedom from broadband and find the time to disconnect from various appliances that we currently use, which are reliant on the broadband, such as banking and so on and so forth. As some natural disasters have shown us, inability for people to transfer funds from one account to the other during broadband failures leads to all sorts of problems and issues and even riots. So no, I don't think it's a utility, even though it's at that stage. Yes, it should be readily available, but it doesn't have to be as a utility mandated by the government.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy?
So
Okay.
yeah, sorry.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, you don't need to. Sorry about that. So I have a different perspective because during COVID, I was working at the Attorney General's office, and we had a program, a federally funded program. I forget what it's called, affordable broadband. Maybe that's part of the title. But I know that it was a lifeline for so many people who were disconnected because they lost their jobs. They couldn't pay their rent, and they had to decide what they were going to pay for. They needed it for their kids if they were hybrid learning or off-site learning, in order to connect. These things are important for folks, and I know that the program has ended because the funding has ended, and I wish that it could be made available again, because again, so many people rely on internet, and the ability to connect with others, I think, is so critically important.
Thank you, Amy.
Something in here for a brief moment?
Yes, you have 30 seconds.
I just want to sort of mention here that for the last year, I've been trying to get new electrical and gas service installed through, I don't want to mention companies' names, but they are very well-known utility companies here. They're government, pseudo-government agencies. It has taken me a year, and I still haven't had a chance to get that done. If we get that to broadband, I think we're going to be in big trouble. Keep the government out of broadband.
You have 30 seconds, Amy.
So, I mean, my understanding of the question is, should it be treated as a utility and also be made available for everybody? So I'm not sure what you mean by having government out of it, and other than having government regulate it. I think the companies who still provide it would still be providing the service. It's just that they wouldn't be charging the consumers the money for it. The money would come from the government to pay these companies to go and provide that service. That's how I interpreted the question.
I don't want government to regulate it.
All right, we're going on to our last question, and Amy, we'll start with you with this one. How do you plan on working with the state legislature to help reduce carbon emissions and contribute to low and/or zero waste initiatives?
So again, I'll go back to the earlier question where we talked about getting off of fossil fuels. I think, as I mentioned, buildings are a big source of our carbon emissions, and I believe that we should have a statewide BERDO program where large institutions and businesses start reporting how much they're emitting, and then we have to have very targets to strive for, so that we can reduce that within a certain time frame, hopefully a quick time frame. I believe that we need to also make sure that we don't have any new gas hookups for new development projects that occur. I also believe that for public transit, that we need to electrify our public transit system, including school buses. And I also believe that we need to create different types of public transit, not just school buses not just commuter rail stations, commuter rail trains and MBTA, but also making sure that we have other means of travel, like pedestrian and pathways for bicycles. I think those are other ways that we can help reduce carbon emissions. And I forgot the other part of the question, but I think it had to do with waste.
Contribute to low and/or zero waste initiatives.
Okay, so I'm a big believer in composting programs and doing whatever we can to partner with food rescue services and organizations, so that we reduce the amount of waste that we put into our waste stream.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad, the question to you.
My friends, we need fossil fuels today. 100 years from now, We probably won't, as we will develop new technologies. But today, we need fossil fuels. We simply don't have the technology or can develop any kind of technology today based on today's science that will be both clean or affordable. The quote-unquote clean energy is anything but clean. We still use tons of fossil fuels to support the instability in the grid. Every time you produce a single megawatt of electricity using clean or renewable resources, you use 3 such units from fossil fuels. So our grid must have stability, and for that we need fossil fuels. We do that all the time. There's a huge environmental impact from clean technologies, whether it's mining for lithium, which destroys beautiful landscapes, that kills animals. Hydroelectric plants kill the fish and wildlife around it. These are not technologies we need today. The solar batteries or solar, they are awfully wasteful products. To transmit electricity across great distances reduces efficiency incredibly. It is folly to think that we are ready to switch into this. And once again, our roads, our bridges, all depend on oil because that's what pavement is made out of. We don't have other things to put on our roads. Plastics, IV fluid bags, all of that is made out of fossil fuels. We need them today. It would be crazy. It will destroy the poor people.
Thank you, Vlad. All right. Well, this brings us to the end of our forum for the 11th Middlesex District State Representative. Just a reminder to the audience that voters in the 11th Middlesex District may vote for only one of these 2 candidates. Thank you to the candidates for your willingness to participate in our forum and for running for public office. We wish you both the best of luck with the election. I don't believe we got to our closing statements, so if we'd like to do that, we can certainly do that. We will start with Vlad. You can do your closing statement.
Thank you very much. Amy, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to speak with you at this forum and outside of this forum. I'm very, very grateful that I had an opportunity to actually communicate with you on as a more of a friend than an adversary. I hope we continue to do that. And I hope through our example, as we go back to the first question in today's forum, instill a sense of goodness and kindness in other people. People used to be able to talk, people used to be able to disagree, but in a friendly kind of a way. I'd like us to be able to disagree in a friendly kind of a way, and even though you believe one thing and I believe another, I think both of our hearts are in the right place, and we are trying to assure blue skies and peace and clean air, clean water for our children. We just have a different way of going about it. I want to thank NewTV for sponsoring this event in these beautiful studios. And once again, Amy, I thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Vlad. Amy, your closing statement, please.
So thank you, Vlad. I appreciate those remarks. I've enjoyed getting to know you better and having the opportunity to discuss these different issues with you. So thank you so much. And thank you, NewTV and the League of Women Voters. Thank you for hosting this. So as I said in the beginning, I believe that I will be an effective advocate at the State House and move forward bold proposals, whether they're on climate, whether they're on housing, whether they're to get our rail stations accessible and reliable. I will draw on the 20 years of experience I had serving as a representative on the City Council, and I will draw on my experience working at the Attorney General's office in housing. I come with a great deal of experience getting things done through the legislative process. I have proven effectiveness at delivering constituent service, and I have a deep commitment to transparency and accountability. I was an effective and fierce advocate for folks at City Hall when I served on the City Council, and I promise to be an effective and fierce advocate at the State House. Thank you.
Thank you again, both to you, for your willingness to come on, and of course, best of luck to you in your election. I also want to thank NewTV and the League of Women Voters of Newton for providing this opportunity for the candidates to make themselves known. And thank you to the audience for all the questions you sent. A recording of this forum will be available on the NewTV and Newton League websites. The general election is Tuesday, November 5th. The polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you will not be able to get to the polls on November 5th, you can vote absentee or early by mail or in person, as well as voting on Election Day. For further information, visit the Massachusetts Secretary of Commonwealth website or call the Newton Election Office for details at 617-796-1350. Please be aware of the important deadline dates for this election. If you don't know where your polling location is, you can call the Newton Election Office or visit the city's website at newtonma.gov. On the Election Department page, you can verify your polling location. Be sure to check the Newton League's website at lwvnewton.org for more information. The League of Women Voters online comprehensive voter guide, Vote 411, will also be available at lwvma.org. Today's forum is a co-production of NewTV and the League of Women Voters of Newton. Any use or reuse of this program requires the approval of NewTV and the League and must be shown in its entirety without any editing, only after the program initially airs on NewTV. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that promotes informed and active participation in government. The League does not support or oppose specific candidates or political parties. It does, however, take positions and advocate for issues that it has studied. Membership in the League is open to all people. For more information, contact or visit lwvnewton.org. NewTV is Newton's award-winning state-of-the-art media center, specializing in television production, training, and building community partnerships. It is Newton's primary source of locally relevant programming. Membership in NewTV is open to all Newton residents. For more information, call 617-965-7200 or visit the website at newtv.org. The League of Women Voters of Newton in the 11th Middlesex District thanks NewTV for streaming and handling the technical aspects of this program. I'm Jen Adams. For the League of Women Voters and NewTV, I thank you for watching. And remember to vote on or before Tuesday, November 5th. Participate in our elections because democracy is not a spectator sport.